Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a couple of the other games going on around noon. We had Arkansas, Oklahoma State, we had Kansas State, Tulane, we had Georgia Tech against Syracuse. Three really good matchups that might be a little bit under the radar with Texas, Michigan going on at the same time, but some really fun ones that you're going to want to tune into. But now I want to get into where were the upsets last week. After week 0 where we saw Georgia Tech really just take Florida State to the woodshed, although that score was a little bit closer. They just absolutely dominated that game. After we saw that, it felt like week 1 might just follow suit. It felt like we might just get a couple of crazy upsets throughout this weekend. We got 2 of them. We got Vandy beating Virginia Tech. That was really fun. We got Boston College on Monday kind of saving us a little bit with a big-time win over Florida State. But at the end of the day, double-digit favorites went 58-2 this past weekend. I don't think that's going to happen this weekend. Now, I don't know where these are going to come because it's not very easy to find these. But at the end of the day, I'm going to cover about 7 games here, I think, and I feel like one of them is going to go away that we're not expecting this upcoming week. So let's go ahead and jump into this, and I'll start with Troy against Memphis. Memphis is in a very typical spot that you find a lot of these teams in, where you're coming off a game where you played just very clean football, did what you needed to do in week 1. You're going into a game against Florida State that is huge. There's no two ways about that. You're going down to Tallahassee against a Florida State team that is struggling right now about as much as you possibly could struggle. You have every ability to win that game, and you really want to. And I think there's a reality where they could be looking ahead to that game just a little bit. And this Troy team is very talented and has the ability to take the air out of the ball the way that they need to win this game. Damian Taylor, very talented player, had over 100 yards last week against Nevada. Very explosive, can do a ton of different things in the run game. So if you can get this game slowed down, if you're Troy, and if you can get this game down into the 20s and 24-20 or something like that at the end of the day, you got to feel pretty good. And Memphis, if you come just a little bit not prepared for that big time, or for this game with that big time game against Florida State coming up, it might just be a little bit closer than people are thinking. And Gerard Parker, a very talented coach that was at Notre Dame last year but took over for Troy this year, he's looking for his big-time signature win, and it might just be this weekend where Memphis is looking just a little bit too far forward. Moving forward, Baylor going up to Utah for a conference game? No. For some reason, this is not a conference game. We saw this, we're going to see this a couple of times in the Big 12 throughout this year. I believe Arizona at Kansas State is another example, but this was one that was set up before that Utah joined the Big 12, so they're playing this out as a non-conference game, which is probably pretty good for Baylor, all things considered, because this one likely will not go their direction, but maybe it will. Maybe this is where we see that big-time upset. Utah is favored by 14 points in this game, but Daquan Finn is one of those guys that can just totally change a game. His offense by himself, I've said this probably a million times at this point, but very talented guy. Did have 2 picks against Tarleton State a week ago, so cannot happen this week if they're expecting to beat Utah. There's no doubt about that. But for me, it's more about Dave Aranda. I think you're looking at this offense for Utah, and they have so many guys, and they have Cam Rising back healthy, and all of these different incredible things going on over at Utah for that offense. But Cam Rising is still coming back from a year-long injury. He's still not exactly where you want him to be if you're Utah, just in general. If Dave Aranda can get to him, if Dave Aranda can confuse him a couple of times and maybe they get a pick or two, or maybe they get a big sack on 3rd and long, whatever it looks like, they can possibly make some things happen in this game that people do not expect. So I like Utah in this game. I do think they probably win it. But at the end of the day, Baylor is one of those teams that, with Dave Aranda coaching defense and Daquan Finn on the other side of the ball, they are capable of a lot of really special things this upcoming year. South Carolina heads over to Kentucky to play a game, and this is kind of like that Texas-Michigan game in a way. You saw South Carolina look downright clunky against Old Dominion. Frankly, there are a lot of reasons to believe they should have lost that game, but they were able to come out with a win. Kentucky, on the other hand, just rolled. They did incredible things. The Bush Hamden offense looks really confident right now, and we'll see what happens. But the big equalizer here for South Carolina is Dylan Stewart. This guy is incredible. He was dominant in week 1. This is a freshman edge that is just electric and can totally blow up a game. And then you have Kyle Kennard on the other side. Both of them combined for 4 sacks and 6 tackles for loss on Saturday. So a ton a ton of confidence of those two coming off the edge. And if you can rattle Brock Vandagriff just a little bit in his second full start as the Kentucky quarterback, maybe you get a couple of mistakes. So South Carolina obviously going in a very, very bad direction right now. Maybe they rebound in a big way and get a big-time win in Lexington. Cal is heading to Auburn this week, which is a very, very interesting matchup. Auburn favored by 13 in this game. 53.5 is the over-under, but when I look at this game, there are a million reasons to like Auburn. After what we saw a week ago, it was just incredible offensively. But the big time thing I keep coming back to is California is going to have the best player on the field on Saturday. They are going to have Jaden Ott on their team, and that kid can do things that are downright special. He was a little dinged up against UC Davis, still had 2 touchdowns, and is probable for Saturday, so I expect him to be totally fine, be on that field, and I think he's one of those guys that is impossible to fully stop. What they can do is slow him down. So that's kind of the way that Auburn's going to have to go about business, because Cal's going to live and die by Jaden Ott. I can promise you that. They do not have a ton of other options out there that can really compete, at least at an SEC level. So Jaden Ott's going to be the guy a lot in this game. And I think when you look at Auburn, they're playing with a lot of confidence. Cal is coming in with, a ton of questions all across the field, and Peyton Thorne felt very confident going into last week, threw a ton of really, really good balls, but maybe you can get to him a little bit more. Maybe you can make those windows just a little bit smaller, and then the Peyton Thorne that has been showing himself the past couple of years might just come out a little bit more. So definitely will be interesting to watch, and we'll unpack that one after it. I think this one is one where, unless Jaden Ott is downright special, Cal's probably in a really tough position this upcoming week, but definitely one to watch in that 3:30 slot. Moving on, South Florida, Alabama is one that we just got to talk about, because I have a stat that I came across on Twitter a couple of days ago that I just cannot get out of my head, and it's a little bit of a ridiculous stat. It's one that might not fully apply to this team, but I really love it. The last 5 Alabama head coaches have lost to a group of 5 team in their first year. This is the last group of 5 team that Alabama plays all year. So whether it was Nick Saban or Don Shula or all of the other coaches that came before him, Kalen DeBoer they have a bit of bad history. I'll put it that way. Kalen DeBoer has a bit of history going against him in this game, but at the end of the day, this is not the same Alabama team that was in the past 5 iterations. Let's just be totally honest. Nick Saban totally changed this program, and the talent level on that side is just outright ridiculous at this point. So it's definitely one that I'm a little bit out there on a limb for. But you do have a guy on the other side in Byron Brown that's an equalizer. He's a guy that can totally change a game and make one where you have talent all over the field on one side of the field, and then you have another team that is totally outmatched physically, but you have that one guy. You have that one guy that can make all the big-time plays that you need him to make and take the team on his back. So maybe he breaks loose for a 40-yard touchdown. Maybe he breaks loose for a 60-yard touchdown. But at the end of the day, USF is going to run the ball. They ran the ball 2/3 of the time on Saturday. So if Alabama can stop the run game, then they're in good shape. If they can't, then Byron Brown might just be able to have his fingerprints all over this one. Moving forward, we got to talk about App State. I feel like if you can't talk about App State when they're playing a Power 4 team, you're not doing something right, because this is the team. This is the team that everyone watches whenever they play those big-time games, because they've wreaked some havoc, that is for sure, including last year against Texas A&M. But there's no way Clemson can come out of the game they just played in Atlanta and play this poor of football, right? There's no way that they're going to be able to walk out there and lose to a group of 5 team, especially after what happened in Atlanta. But at the end of the day, on the other side, App State and Joey Aguilar are really dangerous. They have a number of running backs they can throw at you. Kanye Roberts, a very talented running back, really, really good player. And I think this is one of those games where if Clemson can just get leaned on the same way they were against Georgia. Obviously not going to be the same level of leaned on, I can promise you that, but at the end of the day, maybe there's a couple of openings, and that's all that App State needs. They need their defense to play really good football, but then they need Joey Aguilar to just make a couple of plays down the stretch of this game to change it, and maybe they can get it done. I wouldn't necessarily bet on this one. These last 3, I'm getting a little bit over my skis, but at the end of the day, I think this is a really fun game. And then whenever App State plays a Power 5 team, you just have to feel like that's an upset alert, no doubt about it. But moving on, Boise State goes up to Oregon, and I feel like a lot of people are starting to circle at this one just because of what happened to Oregon a week ago. A lot of people are looking at this one as maybe a little bit closer than people think, but I'm a little bit skeptical. I want this one to be a little bit of an upset. I think that would be really, really fun and obviously shake up the college football season. But at the end of the day, this is an Oregon team that missed by not too much on Saturday. There were definitely some issues, and I don't love that O-line that if Boise State can't exploit, then they're going to be in a little bit of trouble. And if Dylan Gabriel can't throw the ball down the field, then they're going to be in a lot of bit of trouble. But at the end of the day, I think when you look at some of the things that happened last week for Oregon, they're very fixable things. They're things that likely are more circumstantial than anything else. And I think they're going to be more than fine. But if Oregon finds themselves in those situations again, if they miss a couple of field goals, if they get a couple of turnovers on downs, then this team with Ashton Jainty on the other side is going to be able to take the ball down the field very slowly, run the clock, and make it really tough on this defense to just keep up for 4 quarters. So I don't necessarily think this one is going to fall into this category. I'd be a little bit surprised if it does, but when you have Ashton Jainty on one side of the field, you're capable of doing some really special things. I can promise you that. So we'll preview all of these games in a little bit more depth throughout the week. I can promise you that. Just making sure that you guys know where I stand on them before we go in. These are ones that I'm just watching grandiose. Not necessarily saying I'm picking any of these upsets, but there are a couple that I think are really interesting, particularly that Cal game going to Auburn. I think that one's a little bit more interesting than some people are letting on. But college football tends to find that middle ground between chaos and normalcy, and last week it was a lot of normalcy. And I think this week we could have quite a bit of chaos. And maybe it happens up in Ann Arbor where a lot of people think Texas is going to win that game. Maybe Michigan pulls one off. But we'll figure out where it comes from at the end of the week, and we'll see just how right I was on some of these different picks. But at the end of the day, let's take our last break here. And when we come back, we have some questions coming out of week 1, heading into week 2. Where does everyone stand? Is the ACC just Miami and everyone else? And a number of other questions that I'll get to right after this, so stick with us.